The following is a production of the Dallas Genealogical Society. For more information, please visit our website at dallasgenealogy.org.
And I'm going to go ahead and turn the microphone over to Patty Smith, who's going to introduce Dr. Terry Turner for today's presentation. Patty, take it away.
Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate all those great announcements, and we've got a lot going on at the Dallas Genealogical Society. I have been waiting for this moment for probably 2 years. I got to meet Dr. Terry Turner at a Duncanville family history event. So he and I were shared the Zoom platform in their annual conference. So I have been continually in touch with Dr. Turner, the compassionate genealogist, and I cannot wait for you to hear his program. I was so inspired, and I know you will be as well. Let me tell you a little bit about this gentleman. He is just quite a phenomenal person. Terry Turner is he's a native of Guthrie, Oklahoma, but he's made his home here in Dallas County for over 30 years. He and his wife, Nancy, have been married for 39 years, and they are the parents of 4 adult children and 12 grandchildren. Most of Dr. Turner's research is in the state of Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Texas. His research has allowed him to make solidified family connections as far back as 1770 in Georgia. Dr. Turner has been able to find several of his great-grandparents beyond the 1870 brick wall before the Emancipation Proclamation. He is a member of the National Genealogical Society, the National African American Genealogical Society, the Texas State Genealogical Society, Dallas Genealogical Society, the Dallas African American Genealogical Society, Georgia and Oklahoma State Genealogical Societies, and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. In 2014, he earned his Doctorate of Divinity from the Dallas Theological Seminary with an emphasis on marriage and family that explores the impact of slavery on the African American family when compared to other ethnicities. He is a certified Prepare, Enrich Marriage and Family counselor and facilitator. In 2018, he authored a Christian historical and genealogical book titled God's Amazing Grace, Reconciling 4 Centuries of African American Marriages and Families. This book traces the ways Christianity and the governmental regulations of the American slave system impacted the marriages and families of enslaved people. He launched a YouTube website, Embracing Our Ancestors, to teach African Americans how to perform family research and find lost ancestors. This website serves as his introduction to a new book, which is going to be published real soon, When Grace Flows Backwards, Embracing Our Ancestors. This book will be released this year. Dr. Turner has organized and pastored the Mesquite Friendship Baptist Church in Mesquite for 31 years. Now in his semi-retirement years, he has joined Dancester's genealogy services as a genealogical researcher specializing in researching African Americans during the years of slavery. Dr. Turner's presentation today is called Where Are Our African American Ancestors? Please help me give a warm welcome to Dr. Terry Turner.
And so thank you so much, Patty and Jim and all of the crew there at the Dallas Genealogical Society for allowing me this privilege and this opportunity to share during the Black History Month, a history month that I love and appreciate. And I'm so grateful for the history of African Americans and what it means to me as an individual and what it means to our people. And I call myself the compassionate genealogist because I've come to understand that as we reach back into the past, finding our ancestors requires of us to love them and embrace them and to look beyond whatever situations they find themselves in. Because many times when you find your ancestors, you will find them in difficult situations. And so it's important that you embrace them in order to be able to continue to research. If you don't embrace them and don't love them for whatever situation they are in, and there are many multitudes of situations because all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And then all of us have difficulties in our life that we deal with. So you never know what you're going to find as you go backwards. And so it's important that you be compassionate with them and love them. And so today I thought in our presentation, and Patty, it's changed a little bit since the last time you and I talked and were together in a presentation. It has changed where I brought in new information that I found and new research that I've discovered. And so I thought I would upgrade it just a little bit. And so where are our African-American ancestors? That's the question that we have to find and answer today. I believe we've got to diligently search the records, legal records is where they're found. Much like everybody else, you're going to find African Americans in some of the same places. The difference is how you research them before the Civil War, as well as after the Civil War. That's where the difference in African American research comes into play. Today, we're going to look at before the Civil War, the will and probate records of slave owners, where they bequeathed their slaves to family members and others. Always you'll find that when slave owners owned slaves, they wanted to keep them in the family and it was a source of wealth. And so they handed them off to their family. You'll find them in deed records there. And that actually gave proof of a transfer of a slave to anyone. And find them in plantation records, and there are some indexes for some records that are in the Dallas Library. You want to look for the comprehensive index of American slaves. If you go to the Dallas Library, and not only the Dallas Library, that book is in many libraries throughout the country. It gives estate records, it gives plantation owners, it gives the names of the were enslaved, and they actually talk about their enslavement in that particular book because they're based off of the slave narratives that were a part of the Writers Project from 19 and 24 through 35. And so what you'll find is that these records are there, and they're in that index called the Comprehensive Guide to the African-American Slave, or to the American slave. And then there are other records like tax records and vital records and records that you'll also be able to find in courthouses. There's a wonderful book that is now on familysearch.org, and you'll also find it in your libraries and on ancestry.com. You'll find a book by Edith Smith and Vivian Leman, who are actually residents of Mesquite. Edith Smith is no longer alive, but her daughter Vivian is, and they work diligently throughout the state of Texas to find the slaves and to try to find them in their habitation and present an index where they could be found. And so the name of that book is No Land and Only Slaves. Wonderful, wonderful research that gives you the name of slave owners as well as slaves. And then you want to look in the 1790 to the 1840 head of household census, the 1850 through the 1860 slave schedules, And all of this is before the Civil War. These records are key if you're going to find your African-American ancestors before the Civil War. Then after the Civil War, you want to diligently search legal records like the 1870 to the 1940 United States Census, the 1867 voter registration. The Freemans Bureau and the Freeman Bank records are outstanding websites that will help you find your family. Records in the United States colored troops in the Civil War. And you can go to Fold 3 and find those. Those are out there, and they'll help you tremendously. I found a great deal in Fold 3 with finding my ancestors that were a part of the United States military. And then death certificates are always important to helping you trace family and to know who family actually was. And so as we begin our research today, we want to start with understanding the importance of when researching African Americans, how names were important. So important that in slavery, most African Americans had no surnames. And they were enslaved people. And so they usually either took the name of their owner or they had no surname at all. And when recorded in records, you won't usually find a surname attached.
Dr. Turner, we've lost your audio.
It's muted. I don't know why it would mute it. Okay, am I back?
You're back. Yes.
Okay. All right, good. So what did you hear last, Patty?
Right after the surnames.
Oh, okay.
The surnames. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so most enslaved people had no surnames, and I think you guys heard that. But the end of the Civil War created the need to find a name. And so what you'll find is that if they had a name before the Civil War, they may have took a slave owner's name, but then after the Civil War, they developed names for themselves. A lot of times they would go back to the very first slave owner, or maybe they had some people in the community that they respected and they named themselves after that person in the community. And so finding where they got their actual surnames from is very, very difficult. But at the end of the Civil War, the United States government required that all newly freed African Americans would find a surname. And so what you'll find is that families began to try and connect with surnames. And so when looking for your family, surnames were important for them. And am I still with you guys? Okay. And so surnames were important. And so they developed the surname. Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir. You're doing good.
Okay. I just noticed my slide didn't change as fluidly as I would like for it to. And so when you look at the difference between surnames and the names that we call ourselves, we'll always record it in records. And they listed us by an identity and ethnicity. And that's been the case in America, and it's still the case in America. And so African Americans in this country, when researching us, have undergone numerous name changes regarding our racial identity. For a long time, the N-word was used, and it's become a word that is scorned today, and a word, the word "in," and everybody knows what that word is. It's not an acceptable term, but it was very common. It was very common in 1865 and beyond to have used that in there N-word. African Americans used it, everybody in society used it. And so if you're starting to research African American history, you're going to have to adjust to seeing the N-word in literature, seeing the N-word being used by African Americans as well as people of other ethnicities. We went from using the N-word to the term Negro, to colored, to African Americans and Afro-Americans, Black Americans. And there's no other nationality that has had so many different race-related identifications over the course of American history. You'll find this quote in my book, God's Amazing Grace, Reconciling 4 Centuries of African American Marriages and Families. And so looking for African American families, the census from 1790, before the Civil War, to 1860 provide a great deal of research for us. When looking for them, we must understand that from 1790 to 1840, the census records only recorded head of households. And in recording head of households, only the head of household was named. And so here is a copy of a census record from 1840 that represents where my family was enslaved. And if you'll notice, it just says slaves and gives their gender, and then it gives an age range. For instance, the first slave there is under 10 through 18. That's a large range. And so here what you'll find is that they were there. If you know the name of your former owners, you can always look for that age range that your relative falls in and try. And the only person who is listed here in a name is going to be the head of the household. Women were not mentioned, children were not mentioned, even though they were white. And if you look at that, you'll see that their names were not mentioned either, which makes it very, very difficult for everyone trying to do their ancestry research. But then you have the slave schedules that also are a part of the African American census. Starting in 1850 and 1860, they were removed from household, African Americans were, and they were put on a slave schedule. The slave schedule represents just the name of the owner, as well as the age of the individual, the gender of the individual, and then it puts the race of the individual. And most slave owners had certain number of houses that their slave lived in. And so it gives you a number of houses that were actually on that plantation. That gives you a little idea of how your family may have lived, whether they were 3 to a house. For instance, this one here, there are 4 slaves and there are 2 houses. And so they were fairly comfortable. That was not the case with all African Americans during this particular time. Some of them were crowded into smaller spaces. But then there were not always African Americans who were enslaved. There was some free. What we have to understand is that during the time of our country, throughout history, 89% of all African Americans were enslaved. At the end of 1865, E. Franklin Frazier wrote a book in the 30s that determined that throughout slavery, 89% of all African Americans were enslaved, as well as 11% were free. Here is a free family, a Lucinda Huff or Ruff, and she has with her all of her children. I believe there are 6 children there. They were all free. I pulled this out because this woman was some way connected to the slave owners of my family, and they actually allowed her freedom. There was always someone who had to oversee, an Anglo person who had to oversee African Americans who were free. And so she served, evidently, these slave owners served as an advisor to this lady, although she is listed on the census. She is listed on the 1860 and 1850 census as a free African Americans. So not all African Americans were enslaved. And if you're fortunate enough to find your family, what a wonderful thing. And then we have from the 1870 census, and it can be your guide to getting beyond the brick wall. In the 1870 census, you need to look closely at those records. If you can find your family on that 1870 census, then you may be able to break the brick with ease. And the 1870 brick wall, and we call it the 1870 brick wall because that's usually as far back as most people can get. They can't jump that wall in order to be able to find their family on the other side of it because the records change so tremendously. But here in the highlight is all of my family. They were living together. They were living close together in Burnham, Texas, just outside of Ennis, Texas. And they were right there together on that 1870 census. Everybody highlighted in yellow is family. My grandfather, Warren, and you have to look at the transcripts and you look at your family members closely because the transcripts often were wrong. The translators didn't understand what people were really saying a lot of times, and they did their best to get an understanding and to transcribe it the best that they could. But many times they were in error. For instance, if you see the second highlighted person is Wayne Turner, but actually his name was Warren Turner. And I know this is my family because the baby there is my grand aunt, who I know was my grand aunt. And then the name of my great grandmother is Eleanor on here when her name was Elvira. And so there were a lot of transcripts, but the people beneath them are family member, but they, we didn't know. We had no idea who these people were. But this census reveals that Abe and Lucy and Gray and Alexander were all family. And then if you drop down at the bottom, there's another Lizzie Turner that's there. And so I say, when you're looking at the 1870 census, look closely at it, and you may find your family all living close together. And they stayed close to one another for many different reasons. And so look at the birthplace as well. It'll tell you where they felt like they were born. They all got together. They said, okay, we're from Georgia, or they knew they were from Georgia. And so this gives you an idea of where you need to go back beyond the 1870 brick wall to try to find your ancestors. If they were from Georgia, then you look for a slave owner that was from Georgia living in the same location, and you just may be onto something. And if you're fortunate enough to find the name of your ancestor later on in documents beyond the brick wall, that are tied into a particular slave owner that now lived in the area that your people were after slavery, then you have found a nugget. And so take note of the young women's names because they often change. The woman at the very, very top, her name is Emily Neal, and she was my great-grandfather's sister, and she actually was married to a gentleman who kept the name of the former slave owner. And his name is Alan Neal, and he's on the previous page. But this gave me contact with my family back into slavery because they were all born before freedom. And so take note of their names, and that will give you some guideline into the families that you need to research. And so the ages of those individuals all tell you whether they were born enslaved or whether they were born in freedom. And so in order to help me solidify and to give me a picture of how my family existed, whether they were free, whether they were enslaved, I developed this chart. And most pedigree charts go from right to left. But I developed this one from left to right, or from right to left, because I wanted to be able to look back into the future. And maybe it's because I'm a little bit dyslexic. I wanted to be able to look backwards. And so, but here is my family on one side of the brick wall. All of the people inside of the brick wall were enslaved people. All the people on the outside of the brick wall were free ancestors. And if you look at this, not many of my ancestors have been free so far. Going beyond my paternal grandparents, most of my ancestors were enslaved or born into slavery. And so when I look at this, it always says to me how important it is for us to know just how close slavery was to us and how far we've actually come since the days of slavery. And so here, if you look down here at the bottom, these are some of my Anglo ancestors that were my mother's father's grandparents, and they are my great grandparents, and so second great grandparents. And so this is the chart that I think all of us ought to develop who are African Americans to chart and record your ancestors beyond the brick wall. And so the 1870 brick wall. And so break through it, whether you got to go over it, whether you've got to go under it, or whether you've got to go around it, however you need to do, whatever you need to do to get through that 1870 brick wall is what you have to do. And so this is Warren Turner. We talked about him a little bit earlier. And this is a lifetime of federal census, another chart that I developed just to get an understanding of their life, to know a little bit about them. And so I have him charted from 1870 to 1900. The 1870 census was the first census he was on. And it shows every time he said where he was born in Georgia. Said he didn't know whether his mother or his father was born. His birthdays were always a different year. He never gave the same year for his birthday, always a different year of 1846, 1849, 1847, but none of those were actually right. And so not being able to read or write determined whether he could actually give a legitimate date for his birthday. And so here, when you look at this chart, it says the places he lived, just a visual for you to keep up with your ancestors. He was always a farmer. He rented his home for a while, but then if you look to the far right at the bottom, by 1905, he owned his own home. He bought a 80-acre farm in Springer or Seward, Oklahoma, and that farm stayed in our family until the 60s, 1960. And so chart your ancestors through the federal census. And then what you will find sometimes, this is my great-grandmother, Elvira Turner, and her lifetime census, she changed where she was born consistently. She never knew really where she was born. I don't think. First she said Georgia, then she said Virginia, then she said Texas, then she said Tennessee. She has made it very, very difficult for me to chart her and to trace her back, simply because the places of her birth changed so tremendously. Her birth year changed every census. Her number of children, it let me know here for her, which was very important, that she had a child that died. In the 1900 census, the first time she mentions her children, she had one child that died, and that let me know that I needed to search the graveyard somewhere to be able to find that child, and I did find her, and we'll talk a little bit about her in a little bit later. But here we find where I wanted to develop a Texas connection. It let me know where my ancestors came from, but then how they migrated to Texas. And so I've defined here for you my parental grandparents, my maternal grandparents, my maternal great-grandparents, my maternal great-great-grandparents, and my maternal second great-grandparents, all from the census records to show where they lived in Texas, how they came together, how they may have been connected with one another. It's the counties that were located close to one another in order to give me some idea, and you may want to do this as well, as to where your family was, where they lived, and where they actually came from, just so that you'll have a running chart of who they were. So finding them will help you identify with that connection. And then look for your ancestors in DNA. I love this picture. This is a picture of the Dahomey tribe from Africa, and my DNA on Ancestry.com shared with me that the Dahomey tribe was one of the tribes that my ancestors are from. And I found a very interesting thing about the Dahomey tribe is that they had the last illegal international slave ship to transport slaves to America in 1859, 1861. They arrived in the Gulf of Mexico at Mobile, Alabama. The ship flotilla brought captives from the African tribes of the Wada and Dahomey, who sold slaves to the slave traders. And so this is a picture of a king that's a Dahomey king. And there is 28% of my DNA that is from the Dahomey tribe. This is my ethnicity chart and a breakdown of all of my ethnicity. And when you get your DNA on Ancestry.com, you get a chart similar to this. I've readjusted it so that it may work a little bit better for this presentation. But if you look at the right side of it, just over Africa, you'll see that I have 89% of my DNA from Africa. 49% of it is Nigerian. Then 28% of it is Benin, Togo. That's where the Dahomey tribe comes from. 16% of my DNA is Cameroon, Congo, Southern Bantu peoples. And then I have 10 to 11% that are from Anglo societies, 5% from Europe, 4% from Wales, 2% from Ireland. And so knowing your ethnicity will help you to be able to trace your ancestors back, because the goal of all African Americans is to be able to trace their ancestors back to Africa. And so this gives us a breakdown of who we are and where we came from, and the ethnicity that we can trace back if we're looking to get back to Africa. And the previous slide that I showed you of the slave ship says that some of those people could have actually been my people, because the Benin Togo people and the Dahomey people, we know one of the last slave ships to actually come to America, landing in Mobile. And I have ancestry that a lot of it is from Alabama. And so when we look at further research that can be done for African Americans finding their ancestors, the Freemans Bureau is a great source. The Freemans Bureau was looking for and assimilating African Americans from 1865 to 1872. That is after the Civil War. The Freemans Bureau kicked in order to help African Americans to be assimilated into society, and they collected information from people who were actually looking for their ancestors. And so when they went around, if you were looking for your ancestors and you were sold away during slavery, what they did was they took these records and they recorded these records. Now, here is my maternal second great grandfather, Peter Alexander. Somebody was looking for him, or he was looking for someone. It really doesn't define which one it is very well, whether he was looking for somebody or somebody was looking for him, but it does show on the Freemans Bureau and records there that show us where he was from. He was from Hanako, Virginia. The account was taken on April the 9th, 1870. And his birthplace was Goochland. That's also in Virginia. And that he was a male, and gave us his name. And the good thing about the Freemans Bureau is that if they found an ancestor of yours, and they would make sure that they made that connection if they had two people who were trying to find each other. And so here is another record, and it shows you just how bad these records were. But if you really look at them, it will give you a great reward if you can work through it. And in working through it, it gave me the names of all of my second great maternal grandfather's siblings, his parents' name. His father's name was John. His mother's name was Matilda. I would not have ever known that information had I not. I knew that through research that I found my grandfather, my great-grandfather, on a census record with him, but I never would have known his sibling's name or his parents' name. His mother's name was Matilda. He had a brother named Harriet, and a sister named Harriet, I'm sorry, and another sister named Myra. And so Peter Alexander was my second great grandfather, and the Census Bureau rewarded me by showing me that also his brother, Chaz Alexander, was looking for family. Both of them evidently filed census records. They were looking for one another. They listed each other on the census records. And in listing each other on the census records, there was a connection that happened. And when you're looking for your lost family, they were looking for lost family, and they were able to make that connection with each other. Now, the wonderful thing about this is through Ancestry.com, I was rewarded tremendously with a DNA match to Peter Alexander's family. And I blacked out their names to try and keep them, without exposing them, because I don't have their permission. But this DNA record shows that Peter Alexander had a sister by the name of Mara. She married a guy by the name of Jackson, and the dad's name of them was John. So this is through lines, and through lines is a Ancestry.com data bank that goes out, finds trees, and connects the trees to DNA matches. And I was connected to this DNA match that also is a connection to my fourth great grandfather, or my third great grandfather, John Alexander. And so here is a great DNA match that shows that Freemans Bureau opened this record up. And then when the Freemans bringing it together with the DNA match really was a great reward. And then search the military records of African Americans that have served in every American conflict. And that's one of the things we have to understand. African Americans have always fought for this country. They've always been active in service. And I'm excited that these DNA records on Fold 3, as well as these ancestry records on Fold 3, have been able to make connections for me and my family. I want to share with you my grand uncle Henry Johnson. He is buried in the family cemetery in Seward, Oklahoma. And my dad died when I was 9 years old. And so I really didn't have a great deal of knowledge about my dad's mother's side. I knew her name was Ida. I thought she might have been named Ida Johnson, but I did not know definitely what her name was. And every year after my dad died, my mom and I would go out to the cemetery. We would clean off the graves. And my mother would always say, "Baby, put some flowers on Uncle Henry's grave." And we would put flowers on his grave. And I asked her one year, I said, "Mom, who is Uncle Henry?" And she said, I don't know, baby, those are some of your daddy's people. And so I had no idea who they were. And yet, when I started my family research, my thought that you need to check and see who Henry W. Johnson is. He was a private in World War I of the 804 Pioneer Infantry. He died October 20th, 1922, was buried in the cemetery. And when I began the research on Henry Johnson, it opened up a world of research for me into my father's mother's side of the family, the Johnson family, which has just exploded as far as going back into the years of 1810, 1815, and finding documentation beyond the brick wall. But here is my uncle, Hazel Turner. He was a World War II casualty, and I'd never heard of Hazel Turner. My dad was born in 1911. 1909. My mom was born in 1911. And so my parents were quite old when I was born. And so their siblings had long passed. But here is Henry Hazel Turner, who was killed in the Solomon Islands. And during the time that he was killed in the Solomon Islands, they buried him on the island. They exhumed his body, brought it back to the Veterans Cemetery in the Pacific, and had him buried there. It gives me information about him. He was a part of the transportation unit in World War II, but I never knew about my dad's siblings. And doing ancestry research has opened up that world. My dad had 3 brothers that I knew nothing about. Our family never talked about them. There was Hazel, there was Ether Lee, and there was Freddie Lee. 3 brothers that never ever talked about in our family. It never came to my mind until I started doing family research and began to explore my ancestry. And so I'm excited to say that he wasn't the only one that served in the military, but he had a brother by the name of Wilbur, a sister by the name of Cyrilla, who were all World War II veterans. And so look for your ancestry in Fold 3 or in military records. And then diligently search legal records. Spend time searching court clerk records. And one of the things you may want to do if you are not in the county or the city or the state of the records you're wanting to search is call the court clerk's office in that area and ask them if they have an online database that you can research on. And they'll be happy to help you with your research. That's to me was exciting because through the online research, I've been able to research my family back to this will of a slave owner by the name of John Tripp, Major John Tripp, he was called. And I found in his will my 4th great grandmother, my 3rd great grandmother, and it let me know how important will and probate records of slave owners are to African Americans. Because if we're going to be recorded, it's more than likely that we're going to be recorded as a bequest to one of their family members. And this is an item here of the will. It says, I give to my daughter, Sally Pope, 1 Negro woman, Nancy, and Delcy uncapitalized, signifying that she was a child, and all the cattle and other things I have hereto given her. And so consequently, what you'll find is that some of the best records you're going to find are going to be wills. And so jumping from that, who this gentleman, William Biggins, was the executor of John Tripp's estate. Somehow or another, Delsey was transferred to him. And if you look in the highlights of the yellow, when he died in 1817, Delsey then is mentioned again as a woman now. And as a woman, she has children. Her oldest was Abraham. The next was young Lucy and Catherine. Remember, we talked about Lucy being on the 1870 census with my grandfather, Warren, in Burnham, Texas. And so from 1870, I found here. But you've got to be diligent in your search, and you got to look through these probates. And the key is knowing who one slave owner was and being able to trace those records going backwards. And so that's been exciting for me to be able to find that out, and just so grateful for the doors being open for that. But then following the 1865 emancipation of Africa, many of the slave owners that owned our people moved to Texas. And what happened was Texas was a state that they thought would maintain their slaves even after the Civil War. And so they thought by moving to Texas that they would be able to maintain them. And so when looking for my ancestors after the Civil War, this record came into existence and opened up another door to who my ancestors were. Remember, we saw Abe on the 1870 census living next to my great grandfather, Warren Turner. And then we saw Emily living next door to him as well. But then it ties it in to my grand uncles and my grandpa, because this was a probate record over some land that their brother Gray owned, who was also on that 1870 census. And so this probate record here of land tied my family to these people and gave me a second solidification of my ancestors going back just beyond this side of the Emancipation Proclamation. And so when you look at the names of those people were all my grandfather spouses. And so this is a record that is from the Ellis County Court Clerk. It's an online database. And if you look down here at the bottom, you can go online and you can do just a multitude of research, not only in the Waxahachie, Ennis, but it also has other surrounding counties that are part of this database as well. And so if you're researching in Texas or any other part of the country, you don't always have to go to that area. If you call the county court clerk's office, they will share with you whether you can do online research or not. And so here's my family, the first free people born into freedom, along with their mother, who was not born into freedom, Elvira and her children. And these are all my family members that are in Seward, Oklahoma, where they moved around 1888 and 1899 from Ennis, Texas to Seward, Oklahoma. And just being in contact with family allowed us to produce all of these pictures. My grandfather is in the top right-hand corner. His name was Levi, born 1887. And I got that picture from my aunt, who was my step-aunt. And she said, I've got a picture of my daddy. And she said he was the only daddy I ever knew. And she loved him very much. And she gave me this picture. And then the picture of Elvira was a picture that came in a frame that my brother Roosevelt and my sisters all took from my Aunt Cyrilla's house. She raised my Aunt Cyrilla after the death of their mother at a very young age, the Elvira. And so it was important for her to keep that picture in that frame, a very old picture in a very old frame that for years nobody knew who they were, who she was. And I was able to determine who she was. And if you see, look at her in the middle, she has a great resemblance to her children. So these are all my grandfather's siblings, and and then in the tombstone here in the right-hand corner at the bottom is the one that Elvira said was deceased, that we talked about a little bit earlier, recognizing on all of the census records each year that she had one child that passed. In 1885, this child is buried in Ennis, Texas, in the Templeton Cemetery there in Ennis, Texas. And so you want to go from there, we'll go from there and we'll look at marriage records. If you find an original marriage record, this is Warren and Elvira's original marriage record. They were born in February of 1869, and it's just very difficult to read. So I transcribed it for our family, and this is the transcription of it. When you look at this record and you look at it in depthly, you will see the name of W.H. Getzendanner at the bottom there in the highlight. W.H. Getzendanner was a key find for me in understanding who the slave owners were of my family. Although W.H. Getzendanner never owned any slave, his wife did. And his wife at one time was married to the original slave owner of my family. And so that gave me a connection going back all the way back to Georgia. And then if you look at the preacher who married, he was also a part of the move that came from Georgia to Texas just before the Civil War in the 1850s. This preacher here married many couples. And W.H. Getzendanner signed off on them as a witness to the fact that their marriages were legitimate and legal, which was normally the case for African Americans just after slavery, because marriages in slavery were not legal. They needed someone to clarify and give credence to the fact that that marriage was a legal marriage. And so when you're looking for your male ancestors, look into the 1867 and the 1882 voter registration. And in the voter registration is much information if it's filled out correctly. When it's filled out, a true blessing to help solidify where your family came from. Here is a good one. This is a good one that was done on Warren Turner in Ennis, Texas, and it gives us when he came to the state, how long he had been in the county, and how long he had been in the precinct. And each of them says 13 years, which lets me know that in 1867, if I go back 13 years, that it was in the 50s, around 53, 54, that he actually came to the state of Texas, came to Ellis County, and lived in that same precinct all of that time. And you'll see the yellow dots going across Warren Turner. Waxahachie is where he said the precinct he was in, and 13, 13, 13 across. But then on the second page, and never ignore the second page, it gives us where he is from, Georgia. Georgia, having traced him back, and then it gives his name again. And then in that final remarks column, it lets us know that he was also an African American, or at that time they were called colored. And so this is a good one. But on Peter Alexander, evidently the registrar was very, very lazy and put down none of the vital information that would help me at all, other than the fact that he was from Virginia. And so when searching online, you want to also look at archived newspapers. And for the folk in Texas, the portal to Texas history is a great site. If you've not researched that site, you want to go to it and you want to look at it. I have been extremely blessed by the research that I've been able to find online through papers. Before the Civil War, here's Warren in a newspaper in Hancock, Texas, for a slave auction. And I found him, a 4-year-old boy, in the slave auction, along with his Aunt Catherine, along with the gentleman I believe to be his grandfather, Rochester, who was 60 years old, Delcy. And we've talked quite a bit about Delcy, but this is not the same Delcy. This is the Delcy who is the daughter of Catherine, and they're all found in the census records in Ennis, Texas. But here they are in Hancock, Georgia, and we know that they ended up in Ennis, Texas after the Civil War. And Catherine also had a son by the name of John. Haven't talked much about the Lady Isabel next to John down there, but Isabel was also Lucy's sister. I believe at this time, Lucy is no longer with the family. This is the first record in 1843 that Lucy is not listed. And I have numerous records before this where Lucy was listed with them. So I believe she has now left these former slave owner who was John Bishop and has gone to reside with a new slave owner who I believe to have been the parent of Thomas Neal's wife. And so Thomas Neal, I believe, was our slave owner in Texas. And I believe that his wife actually owned Lucy, her as a wedding gift. And I found that record as well. And so when you look at archived newspapers, they will give you a whole lot. After the Civil War, this is Emily Neal again. And this is an article that I found on the Portal to Texas, the Dallas Express newspaper. And it talks about the fact that Emily Neal was one of the first colored settlers of Ennis, a charter member of St. Paul Baptist Church, died Sunday night. Mrs. Neal was 80 years of age and well known and liked by both races. And it was exciting for me to find this in the Dallas Express newspaper, which was one of the African-American newspapers in the early 1900s that existed in Dallas. And then you want to look for newspaper and where I found the previous article of Warner and slave auction on the Georgia Historic Newspapers. And on that news site, you can browse by type, which when you look at it, it'll give you type. One of the types would be African-American newspapers. And then the Gateway to Oklahoma History is a wonderful site. On that site, because Oklahoma was thought to be a state that might become an African-American state, solely African-Americans in that state. Of course, we know it didn't turn out that way. There are 2,882 African-American newspapers and back into the 1800s, moving forward on the Gateway to Oklahoma History. And then newspapers by ancestry, a wonderful site that you'll be able to find a tremendous amount of information on your ancestry, on the newspapers by ancestry, which is an archived newspaper site. That one is a newspaper site that will require a subscription. You will have to get it through ancestry.com, or you can buy it outright through Newspapers by Ancestry. And so it's up to you whether you want to pay, but I think it's a very, very good investment. And then finally, as we conclude here today, I wanted to end on a beautiful note. One of the great finds of mine was my grand uncle, and you've seen his picture before, William Turner. He was a journalist, a farmer, and a preacher. He was born in 1879 to 1835. He actually wrote for one of the newspapers in Oklahoma called the Black Dispatch, and he wrote articles from 1917 to 1922. And in writing those articles, William Turner talked often about our family. And so I've learned a lot in those articles. He talked about the farm and how the crops were growing, and how the season was, and whether it was a rainy season or whether the winter was cold. And not only that, he was an advocate for civil rights in the early 1900s. And here he writes an article to the Oklahoma Safeguard, which was an African American newspaper in Oklahoma at the time, refuting an article that said that Negroes would not work without a boss. And he writes this articles, and he said, the Negro will work. He needs no boss. How exciting for me to find this article, because I too am a journalist. I too am a preacher, but I've never been a farmer. But I'm just grateful that being able to do research has been a wonderful experience for me to solidify my ancestry, as well as to break down the connections and how multi-generation flows down to each of us. And when I look at Uncle William, I can see multi-generational experiences flowing down even to me. And so, Patty, that concludes my presentation today. And I hope you've been blessed by it.
Oh, my goodness. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Turner. And just a wealth of information for all of us, and especially with African American heritage. And what a wonderful way to celebrate African American History Month by having Dr. Turner here with us for our February program. And what I'd like to do, there have been many, many comments coming into the chat. What a fascinating family history, great stories. This gives me hope to keep searching my Civil War, pre-Civil War family. So just so many great comments. And I do want to let you all know that I put into the chat the link where you can order Dr. Turner's book from Amazon. But at this time, I want to just check and see, feel free to unmute yourself. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead, type them in the chat, or just go ahead and share any comments or questions you might have for Dr. Turner.
Dr. Turner, I've got one question I'd like to ask you. It's not necessarily in regards to your presentation, but I'm sure you could answer it as a African-American researcher. I found when researching my family that a lot of the Baptist churches back before the Civil War included slaves in their congregations. Do you find that as a rule in general, or was that just particular to my case?
Well, it was a rule in general. The congregations were segregated. The Blacks sit in the back, the Anglos sit in the front, or if they had a balcony, Blacks sit in the balcony. But for many, many years, up until I would say the 1850s, 1860s, the congregations met together. Around the 1850s, 1860s, they began to split off, and they would give the African Americans preachers an opportunity to preach to their congregations. They developed their congregation. They gave them administrative abilities and allowed them to oversee their congregations under the auspices of the head church. One of those churches that I'll be talking about in my next book is the Horeb Baptist Church in Hancock County, Georgia. And the Horeb Baptist Church kept a record, as well as the Powhatan Baptist Church, the New Zion Baptist, not New Zion, the Mount Zion Baptist Church in Powhatan, all have documentation of their Black congregations, their African-American congregations. And so I thought that was fascinating to be able to find that. Now, the key is how well those churches kept records. everybody doesn't keep records the same way.
Just saying.
But when you have a church that keeps good records, they would note the death, they would note the burial, they would note the time that the members joined. And one of the things I was fortunate enough to do is to have a wonderful contact in Salt Lake City, there at the vault. And I asked them to go to the vault to pull the documentation for the church in Georgia, the Hancock Baptist Church in Georgia, of their African-American congregation. They pulled those records for me. So I've got the records from 17, I can't remember the exact year, but it was 1780, around that area, because Georgia didn't really get started until the 1780s. And so it was like from 1780 all the way up to 1870. And it talks about Blacks who joined the church, when they joined, if they had problems, if they were disciplined, and all of those type things in those records.
Wow.
And it's exciting to
Great.
have. And so that's going to be a part of my next book, actually.
Good.
When Grace
Super.
Flows Backwards. Yes.
Wow. That's
Embracing our ancestors. When Grace Flows Backwards, embracing our ancestors is my next book.
Mhm. Any
I
other
have a question.
questions?
Yes, I have one.
Mhm. Yeah.
My great-grandfather was born in 1852 and was said to have joined the Union Army during the Civil War.
Mhm.
So that means that he was like 12 or 13 years old.
Wow.
Are there any records of child soldiers who joined maybe the Union Army?
Well, I tell you, the records for joining the Union Army for African Americans are very sparse, but they're on Fold 3. If you will go, if you have a Fold 3 subscription, go there and just do the research and type it in. You may find them there. They have a database that prisoners of war, and it'll give you a link to go to another site and look up information. And so on the archives, the National Archives, NARA.government, they have records there that will lead you to finding the name of African Americans that served in the Civil War as well. And so, but you may have to call them online, because if you can reach them or send them an email with the name of the person that you are trying to research, and they can give you some assistance on that. But don't call them online. You'll sit online for 4 or 5 hours and nobody will pick up. So,
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Mhm.
Dr. Turner,
Yes.
I've got a question. I'm going from another angle. I have a probate where there are 14 slaves through a lottery system given to the 13 heirs.
Mhm.
And my client is interested in learning about what happens to them after the Civil War. This was done in 1859 here in Texas. The
Okay.
difficulty is, how do we figure out the names that they take?
That's the problem.
Right.
And,
Okay.
and that's what I was referring to earlier, that families, if they knew the names of their families throughout the country, they tried to, use the same names. But often that was not the case, because you could have two brothers living in the same city with the same father and the same mother, and they may have taken a different name. It depended on what they chose to be called. Maybe they didn't like the former name and they chose a different name, but the majority of the time, families tried to unite and keep the same name. And what I found with my family is, even though they were in Texas now, moving from Georgia, there's still Turners in Georgia that I'm getting a DNA match with. And so that lets me know that there were some Turners in Georgia that were named Turner. And my family in Texas took the name of Turner simply because the DNA is matching me to Turners in the state that I know I came from. And so that may be helpful to you. I would start with that common name. I would start with whatever the common name is that your family may have had, that the family may have had, research from there. And if you find a good connection, then that will give you leads to other connections, because names, for African Americans didn't mean a lot before the Civil War. After the Civil War, it became very important to them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've got a couple of quick comments. This is Don Henson. You mentioned the slave ship Clotilda.
Yes, I like that picture, Don.
Thank you.
I love pictures with little children in them.
It's a father. It's hard to see. It's a father showing his son how to build a paper airplane.
All right.
With the space shuttle taking off in the background. So it has a lot of different significant meanings, at least to me.
Tricky.
The National Geographic Channel, Monday night at 9:00, is rerunning the documentary on the Clotilda, the last American slave ship.
Right. Okay.
So, and it might air several times, but that's the time I put it on my DVR to run.
Yeah. So Don, do you have any been in Togo? Ethnicity DNA?
I haven't been able to. I have found some folks who were born before 1865 in my family tree, but I haven't been able to tie any of that information down yet, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, but have you done your DNA through Ancestry.com?
Yes.
Okay, well, if you go to Ancestry.com and look at your DNA, it will give you a listing of all of the areas that your DNA matches with. It'll be a population DNA, not necessarily a DNA that will connect you with an individual, but it'll let you know basically what tribes you may have come from in Africa.
Yeah, I have a family story that says we go back to the Malagasy Republic, and I do have some East African DNA, so that could possibly be true. The other comment that I had, I had several people who were either in engineering service units or pioneer infantry units during World War I as well. And typically those were non-combatant units that, dug trenches, built bridges, roads, maintained railroads and whatnot. So those guys weren't oftentimes allowed to fight, but they did handle a lot of the infrastructure that allowed, to support the fighting folks.
Yeah, that's true. And it's interesting. Many of them went to France. Did your ancestors go to France? And
yes,
that was a common place for them.
Yeah, I had one that went to France.
Okay. There's an interesting article out there. If you type in the 804 Pioneer Infantry, there's a very interesting article on what they went through in France and what they encountered when they came back from France, and the racism that they met after they returned back to the States. My great uncle, or my granduncle, died shortly after coming back to the States. And I'm not sure what happened to him, but I know that that was a very difficult time for those soldiers when they returned home. But it was exciting for them to go and serve. They loved the country. So if you'll type in that infantry, the Pioneer Infantry 804, it'll give you a breakdown of what the government dealt with over there, what our government dealt with, and the rules that were orchestrated in France, because France was a very liberal country when it came to African Americans being there, and the rules that had to be rewritten for those soldiers while they were there.
Yeah, my my ancestor was in the 813th, and the note that I have was that they actually did fight. They typically don't fight, but in this case, they did fight, and it was in France.
Okay.
And I noticed that several people put links in the chat. There are databases where you can look up all of the folks from the U.S. colored troops. And I kind of had a similar scenario where I had two people, according to the census, they were 16, but their enlistment records, said they were older when they enlisted in the So, the person who was 12 or 13, might have lied about their age, So.
True.
Yeah.
Good. And we had another question from Sharon. If Sharon, you would like to ask your question?
Yes. First of all,
Sharon.
I would love to thank you, Pastor Dr. Cousin Turner.
Is also a descendant of Peter Alexander.
My brother and my son, Rashawn has done extensive research, and my son has also started, which I'm just really, really thankful for. And he's connected with his father's brother, where they're all doing research together. But this information, this is the first time that I've been able to jump on and be with you and hear this wealth of information. I just want to say thank you. We will be using this for research, and I appreciate you and love you so much. Thank you.
I love you too, Sharon.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. All right. Do we have any more questions before we wrap up our meeting today? Any other?
I've got a quick question. My wife has a lot of family. My wife is white, and there's a lot of family from Alabama and Mississippi. And we've found some surprise Black relatives. And I'm trying to trace down some of the where the connections come in. And I was wondering whether Dr. Turner has found GEDmatch to be useful to tracking people down, because I'm trying to use that and learning about some of the peoples there.
Well, I tell you, we have the GEDmatch specialist on the line with us today, and Patty Huff. She is. But I have found it to be very, very helpful. Of course, the problem is we don't know the names of those people, but I have found where I can actually divide my family and be able to research different sides a lot easier through GEDmatch than any other database that I've been able to use. And so, Patty, why don't you help us with that question?
Okay, and I am putting it in the chat that GEDmatch.com is a free third-party site. And they developed the site about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and download your raw DNA data from whatever testing site you've tested. And then you upload it into the GEDmatch site. This gives you an opportunity to be able to view testers that have put their DNA on GEDmatch.com. You can view testers from Family Tree DNA, 23andMe DNA, Ancestry, Living DNA, and there's probably about 7 different other sites that, and this way you don't have to purchase DNA kits from every one of the testing sites. You can load it onto the GEDmatch site. And so definitely a great resource. And I believe that I just did a GEDmatch teaching for the DNA special interest group for DGS. And I believe that is on our DallasGenealogy.com website, if you would like to go take a look at the GEDmatch presentation that I did. So, and then this weekend I'll be doing a presentation in Bosque County on GEDmatch, but I don't know that it's going to be on a Zoom. So, yeah, that is definitely a good way. And if you guys want to share your GEDmatch numbers, Dr. Turner and Steve, that might be a great thing to do. Maybe you could share it through the chat as well. So, any other questions, comments that you'd like to share before we wrap up? I have something special that I want to share before we wrap up. Oh, great. Thank you, Tony, for putting this. So the link to the GEDmatch presentation is on the chat now. So if you want to copy all of, if you
How far is Bosque County from Dallas?
It is near Waco.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's a 3-hour workshop, and it's specifically on GEDmatch. Everyone is going to be bringing their laptops to the event. And I have assistants that will be helping me so we can have one-on-one people helping others. There'll be a presentation that I'll do, and then we're going to just really dig into it and get those who have not downloaded will download their raw DNA so that we can start doing some genetic test comparison with the.
Is that open to anybody, or is that a closed group?
It's open to anybody. Yes, and it's they're not.
When is that?
It is this coming Saturday. Well, it's on the 12th.
On the 12th. Okay.
Week from today. So next Saturday, and we're meeting from 10 until 2.
Okay.
And Steve, I'll also
10 till
tell you
1. 10 till 1. Mm-hmm.
that if you are not able to make that, which that sounds like a great presentation, our DNA special interest group, if you will, they're meeting online, and if you will join their next meeting, I'm sure you can probably find several people who would love to help you get started with GEDmatch.
Absolutely.
Sure. Thank you very much.
All right. Very good. And let's see, we have somebody that has just posted here. Wonderful presentation question. This is from Corley. She does not have a microphone, but she has a question. When an individual was sold as a result of probate, what was the process? And they're looking in Giles County, Tennessee. I've got ancestors from Giles County, Tennessee as well. Okay, we've got some GEDmatch numbers coming in too. But do you want to answer that, Dr. Turner, about when individuals were sold and in the probate? What was that process like?
Well, every state had different rules and regulations for probate. And so a lot of that depends upon the person, one, because a woman's probate was normally different from a man's probate, where the coverture laws for women took from them all of the rights when they married a man. And so they really had no rights a lot of times, unless the father who left them, or when they were bequeathed something, or a slave or whatever they got, was specifically stated in the probate that it is only for the heir, and excluding all husbands and their control in any way. And so women's probates were different usually from men's probates. And so, you have those differences, but in every state, the probate laws were different based upon that state. But usually when a slave was probated, that slave went to the person normally that was requested, that was given to in the will. So if a will gave a slave to a son or a daughter, that's usually who it went to, unless that son or daughter chose not to accept. Then it was supposed to have gone to the next heirs of the family. It would have gone to a sibling, or it would have gone to a grandchild, or so. So consequently, the laws were fairly different, but there were some basic laws that were in place for probate, just as there are today. So, yeah.
Oh, that is good. And I know some wills that I have looked up for clients that were white ancestors, that were white clients that owned slaves listed the names of their slaves in their will. So sometimes we get lucky that way.
Well, if you notice, the wills that I listed earlier had the names, and they almost always have the names. But I mean, sometimes a first name is no good without a last name, except especially if it's a common name. And where you really, that's one of the difficulties of working back beyond the Civil War, is so many of the names were common among the slaves that were on various plantations. Many times, siblings who were slave owners had slaves with the same names. And of course, working through that can sometimes be difficult, especially when there is not a birth year placed with it. And so one of the things that has been very helpful for me was in some of those probate records, they did go through and they put the names as well as the year of birth, which helped to solidify that there was a range. And you got to realize that birth years changed even during the years of slavery. And so you have to look at that range of probably, I say 10 years. You got to give a person 10 years in determining whether this could possibly be the same person or not.
Gotcha. Very good.
I have a question. This is Tiffany. I was able to search back to the 1880s census in Georgia. And so I was able to find on there that my ancestor, where it says like the mother birthplace was Africa. Do you have any suggestions on ways to search to find that missing mother from the 1880 census, or what tools to use?
Okay, you're looking for a mother. What was the connection with Africa? She was from Africa?
That's what it's listed on the 1880 census.
So are you trying to find where from Africa she's from?
Either that, or if there's an ability to find, basically I'm stuck at 1880 and I can't before that.
Has there been any DNA tests?
Yes, there has, but I am mixed, so it's kind of difficult, but the majority is Nigeria.
Okay. Well, one of the things there were major coasts as well as trading posts for Africans when they came to this country in different parts of the country. And so you can look into those coasts where Africans were actually traded when they came here. See if there isn't a connection with the area of Nigeria and the people of Nigeria coming to those various areas. That's why I pointed out earlier that the ethnicity chart that I showed for my ancestors and where they came from, and how they came from Nigeria, and they were the Yoruba tribe and the Igbo tribe. Knowing those tribes, if you look at that chart, it will tell you by clicking on the Nigerian chart and then reading the background behind those countries, and it will tell you where and when those people migrated to the country. And so that may be helpful to you. It won't give you a definite connection, but it will give you some identification, some idea rather, where you can go to look for that particular ancestor. Now, getting beyond the coast of America back to Africa, Alex Haley is amazing that he was able to do that. Not many of us are going to really be able to make that transition, except you can find on the docks of America where the slave ships landed a documentation that says where they came from. And so that's the challenge here. But it's wonderful that you know that she says she was the African. That's the original ancestor for you in this country. That's one of the original ancestors.
That's cool.
And that's just an amazing find if you can find
Excellent. Very good. And this leads me to, there's so many more questions, I'm sure, but we probably need to wrap it up. And somebody has asked Dr. Turner if you are willing to share your GEDmatch kit number in our chat. That would be very helpful. And so Dr. Turner here's got his GEDmatch number up there, and please feel free to copy. You can just copy the entire chat if you would like as well. So do we have any other announcements or any other thoughts before we conclude our meeting today? Jim?
No, is there any other questions anybody has? Dr. Turner, I've noticed in the chat, there's just dozens and dozens of very much thank you for your presentation and this great, awesome information. So I think people really have appreciated that today. And I too appreciate you being with us. So if there's no other questions or announcement, we will go ahead and adjourn this meeting for today. And I wish everybody a good afternoon.
All right.
This has been a production of the Dallas Genealogical Society. If you're already a member, thank you. Your fees have been supporting these and other society activities. If you're not yet a member, please consider joining now. Go to dallasgenealogy.org and click on the membership tab.